Theresa May flew back to London after last night's talks, leaving the EU 27 leaders to vote on whether or not to allow Brexit talks to move on to the next stage. Donald Tusk confirmed the news on Friday lunchtime, congratulating the Prime Minister as he confirmed the EU leaders were happy with the progress made. The Prime Minister was applauded by her European counterparts at a Brussels dinner last night after German Chancellor Angela Merkel thanked her for her efforts in Brexit talks. The EU still wants more detail from Britain about her vision for the end state of Brexit talks, but trade talks now appear to be on the horizon. European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker was among the first to speak to reporters as leaders arrived at the summit this morning. Speaking about May's round of applause last night, he said, "Some of us thought, including me, that she did make big efforts and this has to be recognized." Asked about the Austrian Chancellor's comments that Brexit could never happen, Juncker hesitated for a moment before replying that depends on the British Parliament and the British people, it's not for us to decide what the British have to do. Scroll down for all the updates from Brussels as they happened. EBS Sky NEWS EU Summit. May and Juncker appear to have different ideas on when Phase 2 talks will begin. 5:15 p.m. European leaders line up to support Mrs. May. The Prime Minister has been given a new burst of support by EU leaders, who claim they will put her views before MPs if Parliament sends her packing to get a better deal. Mrs. May lost a crunch vote in the Commons earlier this week after Tory rebels backed an amendment to allow Parliament to vote down a final Brexit deal. Luxembourg's PM Xavier Bettel made it clear that it came down to the Prime Minister and not rebellious MPs to make the final call. He said, "To think Theresa May will negotiate something, we will negotiate something and then again she will go back to Westminster is not good for the position of the negotiations. Westminster should trust that Theresa May will do the best for the UK." An aide to French President Emmanuel Macron went on to throw the Elysée weight behind Mrs. May. He added, "Mrs. May is our main negotiating partner. It's obvious that we will not renegotiate new amendments after striking the deal." And the Netherlands top man Mark Rutte described the Prime Minister as having formidable stature. He claimed the divorce deal agreement showed you should not underestimate her when it came to brokering a deal for Britain. 4:30 p.m. I hate Brexit. Dutch PM blasts UK's awful decision. Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte has slammed the nation's awful decision to leave the EU, while warning Theresa May to hurry up and decide what she wants from Brexit. Speaking from the EU summit in Brussels, Mr. Rutte said he hated Brexit and hoped the UK would change their minds. Asked if Article 50 could be revoked, he said, "That's still possible. I assented. I'm not expecting that it will happen, and as you know I hate Brexit, so I hope this will happen, but it is not the impression the British government gives at the moment. But if they would come back on this awful decision of the majority in Britain to leave the European Union, I would be all too happy. As far as I know legally we could rescind the whole process." 3:30 p.m. Juncker. Europe will not be weakened by German instability. Jean-Claude Juncker has claimed the EU will remain strong in the face of instability caused by Germany's fraught coalition negotiations. Ms. Merkel is currently in desperate talks to form a coalition and support her long-standing role as Chancellor, potentially reaching out to former European Parliament chief Martin Schulz, who heads up her political rival the SPD, but Mr. Juncker claimed the EU would survive the unstable politics of the European power broker. He said, "I don't think that the German position, no matter if it takes further weeks or months, would weaken the actions in Europe. A country is not only a government, a country is also a country, and everyone knows about the influence of Germany in the European Union." However, he added he was not pleading for the German government to wait for another year. 3:20 p.m. Stephen Hammond defends his decision to scupper Theresa May's Brexit plans. Stephen Hammond, one of 11 Tories to defy Theresa May on the EU withdrawal bill this week, has defended his decision to vote against his party on Amendment 7. His vote on the amendment, which was tabled by Dominic Grieve, means a Brexit deal must be approved by an Act of Parliament before it can proceed. However, despite scuppering Mrs. May's plans for the nation, he insisted his actions represented his constituents. He said, "I am accountable only to my constituents, and the vast majority of comments I have received since the vote have been very positive. My constituency voted very heavily to remain, and so it is fully understandable that they want to ensure Parliament will have control over the Brexit process and a say on the final terms of the agreement." Shortly after the vote, Mr. Hammond was fired from his position as the party's vice-chairman. He went on to claim his actions were a matter Leave campaigners should agree with him on. Writing in The Guardian, he added at the core of the Leave campaign was a promise to take back control, and now Parliament can do just that, to ensure we can fully scrutinise and decide on the most significant constitutional change for a generation on behalf of our constituents. It is somewhat ironic that it takes a Remain campaigner like me to deliver what the Leave campaigners claimed they wanted all along. 3 p.m. Vincent Wood takes over live reporting. 2:35 p.m. Paolo Gentiloni awaits very complicated Brexit talks. Italian PM Paolo Gentiloni has spoken about the very complicated talks that await Brexit negotiators on both sides of the Channel. He said chief EU Brexit negotiator Michel Barnier will present the Commission with his proposal on the guidelines for the second phase on Wednesday, and the Council's presidency office will give evaluation by Christmas. The second phase starts immediately with the awareness that it is a complicated subject. The Irish Prime Minister stressed that between Ireland and Northern Ireland there are 142 agreements in several areas, and almost all of them involve EU funding or involvement. Or, to make another example, the UK takes part in 752 international agreements with the EU. 2:25 p.m. Theresa May speaks for the first time since Brexit progress was confirmed by Brussels. Speaking from her Maidenhead constituency, the Prime Minister said this is an important step on the road to delivering a smooth and orderly Brexit that people voted for in June last year. The UK and EU have shown what can be achieved by commitment and perseverance on both sides. I'm pleased that it's been agreed we should make rapid progress on an implementation period which will give certainty to businesses and individuals. There's still more to do, but we're well on the road to delivering a Brexit that will make Britain prosperous, strong and secure. Theresa May went on to say that Phase 2 talks will begin straight away, less than an hour after Jean-Claude Juncker vowed discussions would begin in March. 2:15 p.m. Belgian PM honours Theresa May's courage. Charles Michel, the Belgian Prime Minister, has vowed to honour the courage of Theresa May after her Brexit speech to EU leaders last night. Asked about the progress of Brexit talks, he said no one should be duped. We know the following phases. The transition and the future relationship will be complex and sensitive. We will need to look for some clarity at 27 on what we propose on the future relationship, and the Brits will need to tell us clearly how they envisage their future relationship with the European Union. 2:10 p.m. Fury from Jacob Rees-Mogg. Perhaps unsurprisingly, ardent Brexiteer Jacob Rees-Mogg has hit out at the hard-nosed negotiating stance of the EU. He told Sky News, as usual, the EU has set out a hard-nosed negotiating stance. We must be equally robust. If the acquis, the ECJ and free movement remain, we would not be in an implementation period but would still be de facto in the EU. I assume that Her Majesty's government will make its own proposals and not roll over in the way it did at the beginning of the process. Sky News. Theresa May speaks for the first time since Brexit progress was confirmed. 2:05 p.m. Irish Taoiseach Leo Varadkar pressed on Brexit. Ireland's close relationship to Britain has seen Varadkar hit once again with a series of Brexit questions. Mr. Varadkar responded, the view of the EU is that the transition period should go on for 2 years and it should not be renewable. There is a view around the table that we should be spending the transition phase negotiating the new EU-UK relationship. We should try to have that done as much as possible before the UK leaves the EU. That was very much a topic of discussion around the table. The Irish government was very grateful about the level of solidarity from other member states. We got enormous support and solidarity from all of the other EU countries and institutions. The reason why the EU got a good outcome so far is because of the EU unity. So we very much agreed that we continue to operate in that vein and that there would not be bilateral negotiations. The new treaty between the UK and the EU will be a new agreement and will have to be ratified by all 27 member state parliaments. I never thought Brexit was a good idea. I still don't, but I accept that the decision has been made. My job is to try to maintain as much as possible the status quo that exists. Everything I'm doing is trying to defend the status quo. 1:55 p.m. Estonian PM Bohman's sad divorce. Estonian Prime Minister Jüri Ratas has revealed his thoughts on Britain's impending EU exit. He said Brexit was not on our priority list, but it is still very much in our hearts. A divorce is always sad and always very difficult. Moreover, it will have an impact on our soul. The unity of the 27 in these negotiations have served us well. My very sincere hope is that the EU27 can show this unity in other areas in years to come. 1:40 p.m. Tusk not optimistic about a full Brexit deal by March 2019. Donald Tusk has said a full Brexit deal by March 2019. The planned departure date is realistic but dramatically difficult. Juncker added the renegotiations on the second phase will begin in March next year. I cannot say when they will conclude. He says EU Brexit negotiator Michel Barnier will hold 5 or 6 seminars with member states to find out where their intentions lie on issues surrounding Brexit. 1:30 p.m. Juncker echoes Tusk. Jean-Claude Juncker has reiterated Tusk's comments, along with a lot of praise for the EU leaders. He spoke of his friendship with Jüri Ratas, the Prime Minister of Estonia, which currently holds the EU presidency, and described Theresa May as a tough, smart, polite and a friendly negotiator. 1:25 p.m. Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn calls on May to learn from her mistakes. Jeremy Corbyn has called on the PM to learn from her mistakes as he reacted to news that Phase 2 of Brexit talks can begin. He said it is welcome that the European Council has at last agreed to move to the crucial second stage of the Brexit negotiations. However, this should have happened months ago. The truth is that the government's chaotic handling of the Brexit talks has hindered progress, fueled uncertainty and risked economic damage. Theresa May must learn from her mistakes, put the needs of the country before her party and prioritise negotiating a future relationship with a European Union that puts jobs and the economy first. Donald Tusk speaks to reporters after today's Brexit announcement. 1:20 p.m. Spanish PM wants Gibraltar agreement. Mariano Rajoy, the Prime Minister of Spain, has called for an agreement between Britain and Spain as concerns over the future of the Gibraltarian border grow. He said there is no clear time set yet on the transition of the UK. There is a discussion about 2 years, but it's not clear yet how long. There will be no discussion about the transition without first agreeing on the future relationship. Whatever future agreement between the EU and the UK, there has to be an agreement between Spain and the UK for that to apply to Gibraltar. We also ask that this applies to the transition period. The border dispute is likely to be resolved in a similar way to the Irish border agreement that was thrashed out last week, but we'll wait for confirmation on that. 1:15 p.m. Tusk on Brexit. Donald Tusk thanks those who have helped Brexit talks to progress to this stage. He said opening the second phase of negotiations would not be possible without the unity of the EU27, the hard work of EU chief negotiator Michel Barnier and the constructive effort of Theresa May. 1:10 p.m. Tusk and Juncker greet the press. European Council President and European Commission President, along with the Prime Minister of Estonia, are speaking to the press. Donald Tusk has opened the press conference and has begun by discussing other EU affairs. Sky News. Merkel and Macron address the media. 1:05 p.m. Tough times ahead. The collective line from EU leaders on Brexit is that upcoming talks will be tougher than the first phase. Spain's Mariano Rajoy, Germany's Angela Merkel, senior MEP Manfred Weber and EU chief Jean-Claude Juncker are among the leaders who have issued the warning. 12:55 p.m. Merkel and Macron address the press. The German Chancellor and the French President, two of the most influential EU leaders, are holding a joint press conference. Mrs. Merkel praised the significant progress on Brexit but warned the upcoming phase is an even tougher piece of negotiation than we had up to now. All 27 member states have put in tremendous efforts and stood together. I'm very optimistic that we'll continue to go forward in quite the same spirit. Mr. Macron said Brexit was not the only topic discussed during the summit, but he thanked the EU's Brexit negotiator Michel Barnier for his hard work. 12:50 p.m. Farage sets out his own Brexit red linen. Nigel Farage has called on Theresa May to stick to the March 2019 Brexit deadline following the slow pace of talks so far. Speaking to Sky News, the British MEP criticised the Prime Minister's plans to have an implementation period when cutting ties with Brussels. He said it took 9 months to trigger Article 50. 2 years of Article 50 and now, as I say, the Prime Minister wants to extend the whole thing for at least another 2 years. Look, I hope at least we leave the European Union by name at the end of March 2019 and I think the Prime Minister must stick very firmly by that. Mr. Farage claimed the Prime Minister must also stick by her withdrawal bill amendment next week, which would set a legal date for when the UK leaves the bloc. Click here to see more of what Farage had to say. 12:45 p.m. Juncker and Tusk press conference. Jean-Claude Juncker and Donald Tusk are set to address the media at 1 p.m., a little later than planned. The delays are being blamed on hold-ups earlier in the day. Stay tuned. 12:25 p.m. A good day for David Davis. The Brexit Secretary has joined Theresa May in welcoming the news from Brussels. He tweeted, "Today is a good day for Brexit and an important step for Britain. Thanks to hard work and determination, we have reached an important milestone and have achieved sufficient progress. There is still lots of work to come, but we are ready for the next stage." 12:20 p.m. Theresa May response to Prime Minister has taken to Twitter following the news. She wrote, "Thank you to Presidents at Juncker and at Donald Tusk. Today is an important step on the road to delivering a smooth and orderly Brexit and forging our deep and special future partnership." Shortly afterwards she added, "We will deliver on the will of the British people and get the best Brexit deal for our country, securing the greatest possible access to European markets, boosting free trade with countries across the world, and delivering control over our borders, laws and money." 12:15 p.m. British business groups welcome Brexit. Progress. 5 business groups: the British Chambers of Commerce (BCC), Confederation of British Industries (CBI), Manufacturers Organisation, Federation of Small Businesses (FSB), and Institute of Directors (IOD) have released a joint statement welcoming the progression of Brexit talks. The statement reads, "We welcome the fact that the European Council has approved the progression of talks to the discussion of a transition period and a future trade relationship. It is our collective view that the transition period must now be agreed as soon as possible, to give businesses in every region and nation of the UK time to prepare for the future relationship. Further delays to discussions on an EU-UK trade deal could have damaging consequences for business investment and trade, as firms in 2018 review their investment plans and strategies. While our members will be particularly pleased that EU citizens currently living and working in the UK now have more clarity, it's still essential that an unequivocal commitment on the future rights is made whatever the outcome of negotiations. We will continue to work with the government to ensure that UK firms can overcome the challenges and take advantage of the opportunities that a new trading relationship with the EU and the rest of the world will bring." Getty into Phase 2. 12 p.m. Brexit guidelines revealed. Here are the Brexit guidelines in brief. Britain's demand for the transition period to be 2 years long has been noted, not agreed by the EU 27. All EU law will apply until the end of the transitional period, and Britain will have to stick to the 4 freedoms, meaning immigration will continue without any changes for several years yet. During the transition period, Britain will be unable to nominate or elect members to EU institutions. All commitments made so far must be translated faithfully into legal terms as quickly as possible. Click here to see the 3-page document in full. 11:45 a.m. Now what? After the unsurprising but welcome announcement that Britain and the EU can now begin to discuss trade and the future relationship, but talks need to happen fast to have any hope of meeting the March 2019 deadline. The UK will have to continue to abide by EU trade rules, treaties and judicial rulings until March 2019, but won't have any say in the decisions made by the EU. The next step is for the EU to lay out the guidelines from the second phase of Brexit talks. 11:30 a.m. Brexit moves on to Phase 2. News we've all been waiting for. The EU 27 leaders have approved the deal agreed between Theresa May and Jean-Claude Juncker and given the green light for talks to move on to the second phase, which will focus on Britain's future relations with the EU. European Commission President Donald Tusk has just tweeted Twitter. 11:20 a.m. Theresa May to keep Brexit date in EU withdrawal bill. Britain's government has no plans to withdraw its amendment to insert an exit date into Theresa May's Brexit blueprint, a spokesman for the leader said on Friday, after losing a vote in Parliament earlier this week. Reports have suggested May's government wants to avoid another showdown in Parliament over the EU withdrawal bill to sever ties with the European Union and may back down on a move to insert a fixed time for Brexit, which some lawmakers fear could tie Britain's hands in negotiations. "We've got no plans to withdraw the amendment," the spokesman told reporters. "We are confident the bill is essential. We recognize the role of Parliament in scrutinizing the bill and will take a pragmatic approach." 11:05 a.m. This is it. The spokesman for European Council President Donald Tusk just tweeted to confirm Eurozone discussions have been concluded and the EU 27 leaders are now talking all things Brexit. Watch this space. 11 a.m. Migration row overshadows EU summit. EU leaders are at odds over the bloc's migration policy and the topic is beginning to overshadow proceedings in Brussels, which was due to be focused on Brexit and Eurozone reform. For years the EU has failed to make any significant immigration policy improvements, and now it appears any new discussions will likely have to wait until mid-2018, after Italy's general election in the spring. The reopening of the migration issue was sparked by the European Council leader, Donald Tusk, who last week described the bloc's attempts to impose mandatory refugee quotas as highly divisive and ineffective. Germany, Italy and the Netherlands have criticized Tusk's migration comments, while the Greek Prime Minister, whose country has struggled to manage large numbers of refugees and migrants, branded the comments aimless, ill-timed and pointless. On the other side of the debate, the Visegrad Group 5-4, made up of Poland, Hungary, Slovakia and the Czech Republic, has come out in support of Tusk's comments. The Czech Republic's new Prime Minister, Andrej Babiš, said attempts to impose nonsensical quotas in a majority vote would only widen the divisions in the EU. 10:50 a.m. dinner in Brussels for those interested in what food the European leaders tucked into last night. The Press Association is reporting May, Merkel, Juncker al. enjoyed roasted langoustines, followed by a main course of capon, and a dessert of first of log with a twist. What's the twist remains unclear. Moving on, 10:35 a.m. Eurozone talks overrun. Leaders are currently discussing the contentious issue of Eurozone reform, and the talks are running later than expected, according to sources. With EU allies Germany and France split on the future of the Eurozone, the monetary union's reform plans remain unclear. This is likely to mean the expected Brexit announcement from Juncker and Barnier may be delayed. EBS Live. Belgian PM Charles Michel expects hard, difficult and intensive Brexit discussions. 10:15 a.m. Brexit riddles remain unsolved. Austria's outgoing Chancellor Christian Kern has warned there are still many riddles to solve as part of the Brexit process, and highlighted the Irish border dispute as a key area where more clarity is required. He said, to be frank, there are still some tasks left over from the first phase, for example the Irish border. Logically speaking, if there can be border controls between Ireland and Northern Ireland, and there can be no checks between Northern Ireland and the UK but between the UK and Europe, then I believe even our primary school children can understand that there is still a riddle that needs solving. The Austrian Chancellor swept aside claims that the British government could not be trusted to stick to its Brexit divorce deal pledges. He said, I believe we can very much trust the British. We are basically all sitting in the same boat. We have the same interests. You shouldn't overestimate the discussions that are also taking place. 9:55 a.m. Maltese PM warns Britain is heading for a softer Brexit after Tory rebels defeat May. Theresa May's Commons defeat on Wednesday evening has increased the likelihood of soft Brexit, according to the Prime Minister of Malta. Joseph Muscat said the amendment, that was pushed through by Tory rebels in the Commons, complicates things and means the UK is now heading for a softer Brexit. He told Sky News it complicates things. This amendment complicated things in terms of a timetable. It doesn't make things easier but would be put into the equation if the Commons rejected a deal. He said, I don't think that any issue of any extension would be at the European side. If you asked European colleagues we had to stop the clocks, we'd say yes. Not sure the British side would be too keen. 9:35 a.m. Morning. Mr. Macron, the French president, one of the most influential leaders at the summit, has posted this early morning tweet. He wrote, Stronger Together, proud of the launch of the Permanent Structured Cooperation for European Defence, for a Europe that protects. UK. For more on the European Defence Pact, take a look at this article from my colleague Simon Osborne. Twitter. 9:10 a.m. Juncker sat his British friends are leaving. The European Commission President has admitted he is still sad his British friends are leaving the bloc. He agreed a deal last week following discussions with Theresa May, and talks are now set to turn to Britain's future relationship with the EU pending a vote by the EU 27 leaders. When asked if Britain will ever leave the bloc after Austrian Chancellor Christian Kern suggested Brexit could be reversed, Mr. Juncker appeared to hesitate. He told cameras on the second day of the EU summit in Brussels that depends on the British Parliament and the British people. It's not for us to decide what the British have to do. 9:05 a.m. Phase 2 talks will be tough for both European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker and Italian PM Paolo Gentiloni have warned this morning that the next stage of Britain's path out of the EU will be tougher than the first. Talks between Brexit Secretary David Davis and his EU counterpart Michel Barnier were at a standstill for months as the pair failed to agree on some of the crucial issues surrounding Britain's divorce. The deadlock was only broken last week following a tough week of negotiations for Theresa May as she tried to satisfy the needs of the EU, the Irish government, the DUP and the British government. However, if she thought that was tough, things are about to get a whole lot worse, according to some her European counterparts. Speaking about May's presentation to EU leaders last night, Gentiloni said they welcomed with great courtesy her kindness in making herself available. However, he warned, "We know that Phase 2 will not be more simple than Phase 1. Earlier, Juncker told reporters, "First we have to formalize the withdrawal agreement and put it to the approval of the European Parliament. Phase 2 will be more difficult than Phase 1. 8.50 am Varadkar admits differences in opinion about future UK-EU relationship. Irish Taoiseach Leo Varadkar, who has been closely involved in the final deal agreed between the EU and the UK, has admitted there does seem to be quite divergent opinions about the bloc's future relationship with the UK. From Ireland's perspective, Mr. Varadkar said he would like it to look as much as the current relationship as possible. Ireland's Leo Varadkar speaks to reporters on day 2 of the EU summit. 8:35 am Ireland demands a timeline. The Irish Europe Minister, Helen McEntee, has urged her British counterparts to offer more clarity on the transition period to allay fears of uncertainty on the continent. She said the terms "no divergence" and "full alignment," which have been frequently reported in recent days following the Irish border dispute breakthrough, essentially mean the same thing, and added maintaining full alignment is a backstop in the event that during the Phase 2 talks, another arrangement won't be found. Asked for whether a 2-year transition period is long enough, Ms. McEntee said, "We do need to put a timeline on it because business, Ireland and the EU need some sort of certainty and some sort of timeline." 8:25 am Hungary hails tough. The Hungarian PM Viktor Orban has described Theresa May as a tough lady as he entered the council this morning. Orban, who has repeatedly clashed with EU chiefs in recent years, particularly in relation to the ongoing migration dispute, described the British Prime Minister as a wonderful person and said SAGS doing very well representing the interests of the UK. Viktor Orban shares a joke with Juncker last night, but relations haven't always been so good. 8:10 am Maltese PM concerned about London developments. Joseph Muscat, the Prime Minister of Malta, is among the first to arrive, and while he believes Theresa May has been pretty constructive, he admitted there had been some concerns about developments in London. Asked how talks were going, he said, "Pretty constructive. We all expressed our feeling that we were grateful to Prime Minister May for her commitment. Obviously we were concerned at some developments in London, but we are totally committed from our side to deliver as soon as possible. I'm not here to give a blow-by-blow account of last night's dinner, but I think there was appreciation from everyone that we have moved forward." Finally, on trade talks, he said the first real big step is for the UK to say what it wants in clear terms. "I think if this happens in the next few weeks we can start in earnest, and by March we will have a very clear European position." 8 am morning. Welcome to the second day of the European Council summit in Brussels, where EU leaders are expected to sign off on the first phase of Brexit talks and allow negotiations to move on to trade and the future relationship between the EU and the UK. Theresa May flew back to London last night after being applauded by her European colleagues for her efforts to negotiate a Brexit deal. The EU leaders are expected to vote at around 10 am to determine whether or not talks can move past the initial exit discussions, before a press conference from Jean-Claude Juncker and Michel Barnier where the result of the vote will be confirmed. Stay tuned.